Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. Today, my guest is Becky Hickman, who's the CEO of RoSPA, and we have a really interesting conversation around whole life safety. What does that mean? What are the benefits of it to organizations? Some of the data and statistics around safety that Becky shares are pretty staggering if you haven't heard about them before. And also, what does that mean for us as OSH professionals? What can we do to get people within our organizations more engaged in safety, thinking about whole life safety, and buying in to the business case for being proactive and preventative about safety? I'm sure you will enjoy this conversation. Cheers.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
Thanks for joining me today, Becky.
Thank you for having me.
No, it's a pleasure. I've been looking forward to getting you on. We've had a couple of false starts, but we're here now, so it's all good.
Absolutely. But here we are in the moment.
Yeah, let's get cracking. So you've been with RoSPA for 20 years nearly now, and you're obviously now the CEO. If people are unfamiliar with RoSPA, could you just kind of quickly explain RoSPA's mission, and then how that's evolved into championing whole life safety?
Yeah, absolutely. It is. It's 20-something years, Christine, which was clearly never part of the plan. But it's funny how these things work out, isn't it? I do always say to people that it is the sort of place that just gets its tendrils into you. And if you really find that you believe in what you're doing, then you're never bored, put it that way. RoSPA stands for the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents. As an organisation, we've been around for over 100 years now. We're fortunate to have His Majesty the King as our patron. We started actually in London as a road safety charity first and foremost. So if you don't mind, I'll tell you our origin story because there's something in it that I think is quite emblematic for the way in which we've gone on as an organisation. So you have to picture the scene. You have to picture First World War, London, blitz conditions, blackout. Obviously it's dark, obviously it's foggy. There's a big spike in road traffic fatalities because people are driving in the dark basically without the normal kind of lighting the way. It was decided, at a time of already national crisis, this was unacceptable. Something had to be done. Enter the London Road Safety Society that then went on to become RoSPA, obviously. RoSPA, as was, set about on a public awareness campaign that encouraged people in the London Borough of Richmond to walk facing oncoming traffic. Nothing more complicated than that. Between the years of 1916 and 1917, as a result of this campaign, there was a 70% reduction in fatalities as a result of oncoming vehicle accidents. And that was kind of the beginning of what went on to become RoSPA. And the reason I take the time to share that story is that working in accident prevention, as we obviously do, one of the biggest things you come up against, the biggest barriers, is this pervasive and really damaging belief that accidents are just a part of life, that they're kind of inevitable, and who are we as mere mortals to combat them in any way? You don't get it in the OSH community so much, Christine, obviously. We understand cause and effect in the OSH community, but in the sort of broader sense, that's what you come up against. So what I love about that is, one simple, evidence-based piece of public communications had a really material impact on life saved. And I just think that's a really nice little compelling argument for what then went on to become RoSPA. You're right, so we started off road safety. Lots of people think of us as being a primarily workplace safety organisation these days, probably because of the reach of the RoSPA Health and Safety Awards scheme, which is enormous. I mean, that scheme has, several thousand entrants from 50 plus countries. It reaches 7 million employees. So that is a really big part of what we do. And that is celebrating success in the workplace. But we're equally involved in drowning prevention, in safety in the home, in safety while people are travelling to and from work and, on the roads generally. So we're kind of, it's all people in all areas. A broad remit, which has, opportunities and challenges, as you can probably imagine.
Yeah. And how did you get involved in the world of safety? Because you're not you weren't a sort of safety trained person, is that right? Am I barking at the wrong tree?
Yeah, no, like if you think of a safety trained person as being somebody that's kind of gone through the NEBOSH route or what have you, then no, that absolutely isn't me.
Yeah.
And as I say, probably some of
Nor
our
me, by the way.
audiences. Oh, right, okay, welcome, good. Pleased to meet
Yeah,
you. I think for some
that's
of
all of
our
us.
audiences, that's perhaps a surprise because, as I say, some people interface with us in that kind of workplace world. Whereas, as I say, I've been at RoSPA 20 years. I'm a communications professional by background. Prior to RoSPA, I worked at a corporate organisation, but again, it was health and safety and employment actually that they were engaging with in workplaces. So I kind of had that background. I would say that really for me, the role, particularly the role of CEO, obviously, it's a leadership role. Of course, it's a leadership role, but it's about external engagement, but it's about a very broad range of external partners that we engage with. So the worst thing for me is to kind of feel like, oh gosh, I have the least depth of knowledge amongst this pool of people, because that's fine, because actually probably I have the most breadth of knowledge. And as a totem of what RoSPA does, I can kind of have a slightly different perspective on things that isn't just the
Yeah,
world of work. It's actually what does it look like in drowning prevention? What does it look like in road safety? And just kind of have that sort of slightly overarching view for things, really. I think that what's kept me motivated is I think that this is something you will probably speak to equally, Christian. I think there's something uniquely cruel about accidents. And I think the primary part of it is fundamentally the fact that they don't have to happen. There are so many other awful things that can happen and that we are ultimately, to a degree, powerless against. But the fact that accidents don't have to happen, to me, just makes them so incredibly cruel. But I also think there's some of the kind of the physicality of an accident, the fact that they tend to be very sudden, without any warning. The fact that they tend to be actually quite horrific, quite gory. The fact that they tend to disproportionately affect our most vulnerable, so our younger members of society, our people in later life, our more disadvantaged communities. All of these things kind of compound to just make you think, do you know what? This is a bloody injustice, quite frankly. It is unacceptable that people have their lives irrevocably changed forever, or that people lose their lives as a result of an accident, something that shouldn't have to happen. And I know enough by now to know that there are things that we can do, and we don't just have to be, hostages to fortune. And I think I've kind of just always had the bit between my teeth about that, and always got a real buzz about the different stakeholders that we engage with and different projects that happen, and this sense that in a big world with an awful lot of things that can and do go wrong, it's just great to feel that there's a little thing here that steadily and consistently, and okay, a lot of what RoSPA does is kind of behind the scenes, but evidence-based and done in the right proportionate way, that sort of thing. I feel like it's making a difference. So yeah, I'm probably not a safety person in terms of the usual guests you have on your podcast, and I've had to listen to some of them, and you've got some really kind of high caliber, really interesting individuals, and I absolutely accept that I don't fit that mold. But like I say, I like to think that perhaps I bring something a little bit different to the conversations that will pique the interest of some and probably not of others, and such is life.
yeah, and I think that's particularly beneficial when we're trying to speak about whole life safety, isn't it? Because we're not just speaking about in the work; we're trying to get people engaged into thinking about safety everywhere, rather than just within the confines of the warehouse or the office or the whatever.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone who asks, why should a business leader care about whole life safety rather than just within the workplace?
It's a totally valid question, Christine, isn't it? And when I'm talking to different audiences, I very much have a sort of spectrum of things that I think it's appropriate to talk about, because I'm always acutely aware that the OS profession, frankly, is overloaded. If you think back sort of 10 years ago, what constituted an OS professional's remit, and you think, since then, the other bits that have been added in and added in and added in. So already I feel that, we are working in an environment where people probably feel that they don't have the resources to do justice to all the very valuable things that they want to do. So all I try and do is flesh things out and add perhaps a different perspective that is of, interest to some people at some moments of time, depending on, how other things are playing out for them. But I suppose the biggest thing is that I would say is that I'm fortunate in my role that we get to interact with an awful lot of sectors, an awful lot, kind of geographic locations, a huge raft of organisations. And I think that a commonality that genuinely comes up time and time again in the conversations that I have with people is this sense that there's a skills gap, is that it's harder than it's ever been to recruit and retain the right people in the right roles. And we obviously know that workplace safety is massively impacted by having kind of continuity and having a stable culture, and the challenges that we find with post-COVID in particular, post-Brexit in the UK, with an ageing population, those challenges are really exacerbated. So if, as a business leader, you feel that one of your challenges is this skills gap and it is having the right people in post, then I think something that's perhaps quite salient and quite eye-opening is to realise that 80% of accidental deaths in working age people happen in accidents outside of the workplace. So globally, accidents are the 6th leading cause of death worldwide, which I think is pretty bloody staggering. First one being heart disease, so on and so forth, things that you perhaps expect, but accidents, as I say, the things that don't have to happen, they're the 6th one, Christian. How do you feel about that? That's not okay, is it? That is surely grounds for an absolute outcry. So in that context, it's understanding the severity of accidents for the UK working population. So 29 million lost working days just in the UK. And as I say, those accidents don't necessarily happen in the workplace, they can happen outside the workplace. But to put that in context, that's 10 times more working days than we lose to strikes. So we all know strikes cause economic uproar, don't we? That's a common kind of theme played out regularly in the media. But 10 times more to the working age population because of accidents, and somehow we're just accepting that, which is kind of wild, isn't it? So to go back to your question, I think I would just probably want to contextualise it to explain that this is the problem, and then it's probably beyond that. It's a bit of a call to arms in terms of, let's recognise the power and the influence that we have, because it can be greater than we realise. So I would say an entry step is to think about, you could make a really robust case to me that I would totally accept, which is basically I'm not responsible for people's, health, safety and well-being kind of outside the workplace. That you could make a very robust argument for that. But I think you'd struggle to maintain that argument when you think about their journeys to and from work. So I would say, at the very least, let's think about road safety. Let's think about driver training. Let's think about those skills, because they are part of people's working life. And actually, for the majority of people, even those working in what are perceived to be very dangerous sectors, for most people, driving is the most dangerous activity they do for work. But then think about the ripple effect of, if we empower and upskill our workforce when it comes to driving skills, wow, societally, does that not seem like a really powerful, important thing that we could do? I mean, you regularly transport, I would think, kind of, vulnerable members of your family. So even just if, next ripple being, it's not just for work, it's for me and my family. But then think further and further. And the roads are a really interesting example, because we're all so interdependent, aren't we, frankly? I could be the best driver in the world, and I will say I'm a RoSPA Gold Standard Advanced driver. Thank you, Christian.
Well done.
So thank you. I also have the worst car in the car park, but that's another story. But I exist, as we all do, in this environment with a myriad of kind of competing interplays, all of which are interconnected. So what's the point in me alone being great? We have to have that mirrored as far as possible societally, don't we? So it would just seem like an incredibly sensible thing that workplaces could do, that would make a big difference, bearing in mind that road accidents are a huge cause of death and fatalities, and actually have plateaued in the last decade. We're not seeing improvements in this country, so it's a huge issue. And then to continue the argument, if I wanted to go kind of out a further ripple, I suppose the other thing I'd talk about is that, again, speak to loads of people in different stages of their career, and they've done different kind of campaigns and what have you. And I think everybody is familiar with the concept of kind of like, it's just sort of plateaued. Like you've got certain risks, you're doing a really good job, you're driving them down, it's all going well. But then it's how do you then, kick on? How do you continue to make a difference? And the thing that we do find is that fundamentally at that stage, it comes to you have to get emotional buy-in. You have to get people to genuinely care and want to be a part of it. And if they think it's yada yada, this is just something you're saying because you want their blood, sweat and tears, frankly, then it's not going to have the impact you want it to have. And a thing that we know from the work that we do that can make a difference is to flip things on the head a bit and start talking to people about the same risks, but in their lives outside of work. So, for example, Severn Trent Utilities, big, well-known kind of UK employer. We did some falls prevention work with them because exactly that. They've done, a lot of initiatives in-house. They've kind of got where they got, and it just felt they needed something a bit fresh and a bit different. So by working with us, we have the advantages of being a independent charity, and therefore it's not contentious for them as an organisation to be talking about safety outside the workplace. They're doing it in partnership with the charity. We of course have the advantages of everything we do is evidence-based, it's led by data, it's tried, it's tested, that sort of thing. So we work with them on some falls prevention campaigns that were to do with falls outside the workplace for their families, for others. And if nothing else, even if you really kind of can't measure necessarily what you've seen from that, what people, repeatedly we hear, and admittedly it's kind of anecdotally more than anything, is that what organisations get from that is that renewed sense of motivation, that renewed sense of like, oh, okay, this is like an actual two-way conversation. You're not talking at me. I'm a kind of part of this, and perhaps together we could, kick on and make things happen. So just culturally, I think there can be benefits as well. So that was perhaps a bit long-winded, but I'm just trying to give a sense of kind of this sort of different tiers of things that may or may not be appropriate depending on where organisations are and the sort of culture they're driving and how it aligns with their ESG frameworks and all those sorts of things, really.
Yeah, I love that. I think the point as well about outside of work is that from the perspective of the employee, it feels like you actually care about me because they would see that as not relating to their work necessarily, even though there is that ripple effect and knock-on effect and so on, which you've identified there very clearly. But they would sort of see that as almost something that's in it for them and it's not about work. And so that is going to energize them and engage them more into safety, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think you see it more with the newer generations entering the workforce. Again, a shift that I see, as first and foremost as a business leader and as an employer, is people are looking for something different. And I think, again, it was perhaps exacerbated by COVID, but we're no longer necessarily just kind of content to turn up and get our heads down and do our work and, take our money. We expect to be valued more as an individual. We expect our well-being to be more of a factor, and we are looking to build lives that feel meaningful. I don't think people, the younger generations, are just thinking of, kind of career ladder and what's my salary and what have you. People want to be part of an organisation that it feels like it means something to them. I know that, obviously we're quite fortunate in that position as a mission-led organisation that sometimes I really feel we're able to recruit and retain talent that feels like, wow, okay, that's a win for us. But it's because beyond a certain point, people have more complex needs than they're able just to get otherwise. So I think for organisations that kind of lean in and try and create these kind of cultures, it's complex, but I think there can be a myriad of benefits, and they are, I would say, becoming more important and certainly not, falling off the radar.
Yeah, I think there's something around, even not from a staff perspective, but from a sort of customer perspective as well. There's a lot of engagement and activism, isn't there, around supply chains, for example. So we're not going to buy from this company because their practices and policies and procedures are not aligned with the way we see the world. And again, that's driven a lot by that younger sort of generation. So I do think that being mission led, focusing on safety, ESG, I think that's got to be the way to go for businesses.
Totally. I mean, we see, don't we, in the professional sphere, we see that in investors, increasingly look to these metrics, the whole business of human capital and how organisations are conducting themselves really is, our way in which organisations are judged. both by the kind of investment community, but also by individual consumers. I mean, I even say to my kids, they're teenage, and I even say, like, one of the few bits of genuine power you've got is where you choose to spend your money. You know, well, that's your money, you've earned it. Think where you choose to spend it. Think of the world that you want to live in and what you want to kind of support as part of that. I'm not a wildly fun mum, Christine, as I think is probably obvious. But yeah, important life lesson. So I think that it's definitely something that societally we all need to get on board. I think because sometimes I feel that the OS profession doesn't wholly know how powerful they are. Does that make sense? Like, often conversations are almost like, oh, well, if this and if that. And I feel like I meet some really exemplary individuals, and it's almost like I feel like part of my job is to hold them up as exemplars for others in the profession to feel like, oh, wow, okay. So, for example, we work with Nike, and it's a supply chain initiative, which is obviously, you know, what you're just asking about there. And what they do is that they have, as near to mandated as it's possible to do so, that their supply chain are RoSPA award winners. Because what they want is an independent, source of credible verification that the sites that they use to supply their products are doing the right things in the right way. So for them, that's really valuable. For us, that's obviously also really valuable because Nike's supply chain reaches parts of the world that we would find hard to reach otherwise. And it just seems like a really kind of sensible win-win that we're not accepting the status quo. We are insisting that we move forward as one and that we, you know, advocate for worker safety and the evidence to support that for the kind of world that we want to build. And that, you know, that's really powerful, isn't it? Just to think that as a sector, that's what OSH professionals, you know, can do. That's the way in which they can change the world.
Yeah,
it
is, and I think that's and that's where actually going back to where we started with your comms background and coming in with a slightly different perspective, I think is really valuable as well. And obviously, this podcast exists to try and shine a light on people that are doing great things, but also to challenge ways of thinking and try and improve people and so on and so forth. And I definitely agree. I think there's an opportunity, and I'd see it as an opportunity rather than a challenge about just how we influence, how we cajole, how we educate, you know, how we sort of drive that agenda a bit more. I think sometimes we sit back a bit and we're seen as a block. We see ourselves as a blocker, not as an enabler of business growth, which is exactly what you've just outlined there. You know, Nike's supply chain is an enabler of business growth. Let's do it safely. It's going to be better. Everyone wins.
I think that's so true, isn't it? It's almost like, you know, back in the day, safety was viewed as a barrier. It was a thing that we have to do. And, you know, the time that people in the safety community got on the board's radar was when things had gone wrong. And I just think that those days are behind us, and it speaks volumes to the caliber of, you know, people that are coming up in the profession, that they speak the language of business, that they are confident conversing at a board level and making sure that the way in which that they manage their teams and their objectives absolutely aligns with the board's objectives. It's not like, oh, we have to derail the resource from X to Y. It's absolutely a part of the same piece. Like, you cannot be, you know, a thriving business unless you're taking safety not only seriously, but it's the foundation. Like, the organisations that are the best, it's absolutely at board level, it's right the way down, it's leaders that walk and talk and all of that. It permeates the entire organisation, and it's the opposite of a additional thing they have to do. It's the thing that enables everything else to thrive, frankly. But it's a powerful way of looking at things, because there's definitely a sense that, as I say, it's a community that has been derided in the past. You know, all the kind of the media, health and safety, it's the easy kind of scapegoat for things. And there's so much pride in owning what, as a profession, we do and what we achieve. In fact, it was Kelly, the Irish New President's podcast that I listened to of yours, and in there, she talks about that, about like at one stage feeling like going to a party, like, you know, I'm the health and safety person. What do? We save lives. Like, genuinely, we save lives. Yeah. And I think that part of the issue is that sometimes you don't get to see the lives that you save. That's the whole point. We're preventing, aren't we? We're stopping things before they happen.
Prevention, yeah.
Exactly that. So maybe that's where part of the kind of the acceptance of you know keeping a certain place in an organization comes from, but fundamentally it's so powerful when you reframe it like that. And that again is what I love about the awards, because it's the only thing that I know of that celebrates success. And as I say, my experience in the profession is that often it's just a case of keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it. Your profile's raised when things go wrong, and that's obviously very difficult circumstances, but otherwise it's just continue head down and crack on. And what that does is it brings together the whole community to really hold up the exemplars and really celebrate success. And never mind about the wider workforce. What about keeping your own teams motivated? What about celebrating just those individuals who genuinely go above and beyond? Because I've yet to meet a person that works in safety that doesn't actually have some fire in the belly about it, Christian, seriously.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think,
No.
if I think back to COVID, like obviously we rightly, sung the praises of frontline healthcare workers from the rooftops. But beyond that, within organisations, who are the individuals that were continually reassessing what safe systems of work mean? In the absence of any kind of, clear guidance, they were continually there making sure that, frankly, the wheels of commerce could keep turning. It was the
Yeah.
health and safety community, wasn't it? And,
Yeah.
were I in charge, that would have been shouted far louder from the rooftops
Yeah.
than it
Yeah.
has
Yeah.
been. But there's a huge
Mm.
amount of assets and within the community, and it's anything that we as RoSPA can do to kind of shine a light on that, and as I say, raise up the stars for others to feel inspired by. To me, seems like really valuable work, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think that is a great way with the awards and just getting people to think about success differently, of getting over, like you talked about earlier, that plateau, because I think that is a big challenge, isn't it? I mean, that's why,
Yeah,
I don't know if you know my background, but I was a management consultant by training, and then I was run over by a car that lost control, mounted the curb, and ploughed into me. So I was just minding my own business, walking down the
yeah,
pavement. And then when I started looking into safety, that got me interested in safety, right? And then when I started looking into safety, the reason I work in the field of slips is because I started looking at the data, biggest category, biggest cause of accidents, injuries, claims,
yeah.
but also very flat. And I always say, don't celebrate being flat. We need to be constantly improving.
Totally. Yeah. No, I did know your history, and I think it's really interesting. And it is amazing, isn't it, how many people in the sector you speak to who do have a story and have kind of these
Yeah,
experiences that have changed them. Um, yeah, no surprise at all that slips and trips and falls would have been what piqued your interest. RoSPA has a big interest in falls.
yeah,
We have a variety of different kind of work programs that we do on that. One of our current campaigns is actually a campaign for legislative change, which isn't always our way of working. Like where things can be done by community consensus or public awareness. There's lots of other means that can drive a
yeah,
change, but this is calling for a change to the design of stairs, because
mhm,
staggeringly, I don't mean to keep throwing statistics out, but it's just what RoSPA does to you. But 700 people die every year just in England on falls on stairs.
yeah,
And that is incredible, really, isn't it? When you think about the things that we worry about, and we really don't
mm,
worry about running up and down the stairs in our own home, that is not there as a risk. And actually, believe it or not, there's a British standard that has proven to reduce those falls by 60%. And it's to do with the change in the stair design and provision of
yeah,
handrails. Nothing wildly complex, basically. But of course, it only works if the whole sector adopt that, because it has
yeah,
implications for blueprints. So we work very closely with the housing sector on our Safer Stairs campaign. So it has to
yeah,
come down to, it has to be mandated in law or not.
mm,
But that's just an example of, exactly that sort of, exactly like you do when you're setting a business. It's gosh, we've got this huge remit. Actually, where can we and where should we look to make changes? And it has to start with, well, what's the biggest causes of harm and
yeah,
that aren't currently being addressed, because there's some really
yeah,
good single issue charities that are all over certain things. They don't need
yeah,
us wading in there, frankly, apart from in a supportive capacity, which is definitely how we work. We're very kind of collaborative. But yeah, that the whole falls one is clearly crying out as
mm,
something. Because again, if you think about how we treat stairs in the workplace versus how we treat them in our own homes,
yeah.
interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it's. I mean, and that 700. I imagine. I don't know the data off the top of my head, but probably 95% of that is at home rather than in a workplace.
Yes,
I would
yeah,
think.
absolutely, yeah. That's in
Yeah,
homes, yeah, yeah, yeah.
because we do sort of, if it's in your house, particularly in older homes as well. You know, a lot of stair, you know this, but a lot of stair safety is about actually if you can make the horizontal as big as possible,
Yeah.
the foot more space, then that massively reduces the risk. But often you have very
And you've got bigger feet than we
narrow
used to have. It's
staircases.
true. Yeah, exactly
Mm.
that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Recognizing the changes. Yeah. I mean, I've got a 15-year-old son with great big clod hoppers. So yeah,
yeah,
there's.
yeah. Well, I've got big feet, so size 12. So yeah, I need quite wide stairs. But yeah, but in the workplace, we do sort of you know you're more likely
Yeah,
to review it and look at it with a critical set of eyes, whereas yeah, in home, you just well, it is what it is. You know, we don't really
yeah,
tend to think about it because you're so close to it. You're going up and down those stairs every day. Nothing's happened yet. All the things that add up and accumulate into sadly those incidents.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that because they happen behind closed doors, it doesn't, you're never going to get media headlines about that, are you? Whereas there are other things that happen that really grab the media headlines. I don't know, maybe like there's a plane crash or something horrendous like that. It's right that that's right there up in the public eye, but it can perhaps mean that we have a disproportionate public policy response to things based on our
Yeah,
perception of how significant they are, as opposed to based on the realities. And sometimes it can be quite mundane things that really are statistically significant, and would therefore, really make changes to A&E attendances and other things that societally we need to be all over. Frankly, we can't keep
yeah,
patching up. We need to stop. Yeah,
yeah. It's really yeah. That's the battle that I face in my business in many ways because you know we're talking about something that is the leading cause of accidents, injuries, claims, A&E admissions, NHS bed days, etc., etc. But it's not very sexy. It's not very high profile, and
yeah,
it's kind of everyone has competing agendas. Budgets aren't infinite, so it's kind
yeah,
of always right. How do we invest our time, our money, in the best way?
yeah,
And that's if you've even got to the point of where we started, which is should we invest in safety in the first place? Which some organisations don't
yeah.
do enough of that generally. So yeah, it's not easy.
I think the whole not being sexy is the thing that, just health and safety has that perception.
Yeah.
But I think the dialogue is evolving, and the more we talk about it in, kind of business language, and the more we talk about CSR and ESG, and the more we talk about well-being, and whole people, whole life, all those kind of, they are perhaps more the business buzzwords, but they are really valid, and we have a really, clear part in those. And it's important to sort of stake that claim and not, just feel that we are, like you say, not the current live part of the dialogue, because I think we absolutely are, and yeah, definitely could be more so.
Yeah, yeah. What have you seen work from a OSH professional perspective to try and shift that mindset within their organization? What sort of strategies have been successful?
So I thought you were going to ask me what I've seen work more generally, which perhaps I'll come back to. But in an OSH context, so many things are kind of, I suppose, common sense. I'm never not amazed by the impact of a charismatic leader who genuinely believes and buys into something. And so many times I see that how that really cascades through a whole organization. So I think that, buy-in from the top, and that, you can't fake it, can you? I don't think in this game. You either believe it or you don't. And I think people really see through that. That makes a massive difference. We've done some really exciting work with visionary leaders, I would say, in the health and safety community. Barclay Group being one of them. They're big, well-known house builders in the UK, and they do some really fantastic work, which kind of started from them realising that, okay, so we do all this thinking about when people are creating these new homes, but actually it's what happens once people are living in those homes is statistically far more dangerous. And how can we look to put that in our thinking, which is quite, I think, big picture thinking, isn't it? Another example would be work we've done with L'Oreal, where, obviously, that's more global in its outlook, but we've worked with them to do some really important community safety initiatives on things like fire safety and drowning prevention, falls as well, in India, in South Africa, quite a few parts of the world. And it's community led, but it's kind of, backed by, as I say, it's the evidence, the best practice, the independent, impartial brand, and just some really good schemes to make a difference to local communities. And as a result of that, they've got really good buy-in. They've got really good staff engagement. They're continually growing how they perform as RoSPA award winners, which is a measure of workplace safety. But it's part of that whole wider ecosystem, isn't it? You can't just look at one bit in isolation necessarily.
Yeah. So somebody who's listening to us or watching us, I don't know this answer, so it's a genuine question. If they had an idea about actually I want to do a campaign for this, is that something they could reach out to you guys and say, could we partner up in some way and and work on this together and create a case study and that would drive a lot of engagement,
Yeah,
wouldn't it?
absolutely, absolutely. So, we understand our mission and we understand what we're trying to achieve, and we have to be quite disciplined in terms of what we
Yeah.
choose to address and how we choose to address it. But a big part of what we look to do is to work with partners. So sometimes it's corporate partners who can be the funding partner, but also be a part of the solution in terms of sector engagement, all sorts of other ways. And we also work with other third sector partners. So for example, our Jan prevention work, we work very closely with the Royal Life Saving Society, the RNLI, etc., etc. But I'm quite hard pressed to think who our competitors are. That it doesn't make sense in what we're trying to do. So I suppose the message is absolutely, if you're a corporate organisation, if you have responsibilities for health and safety, we're really interested in working with you. There's some quite tried and tested pathways that are almost off the shelf available to you to help get involved in this journey. Or we equally work with organisations on, entirely bespoke projects that align with their corporate objectives and align with our charitable mission. So yeah, the easiest thing I suppose is to get in touch either with myself directly, or we do have a dedicated partnerships function within RoSPA, because it's a huge part of what we do. Like together we are stronger. This is important stuff. We're trying to have the loudest voice possible. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I'm sure. Well, hopefully, some people will reach out, and we can make a difference just from this one podcast episode, and get people
Honestly,
thinking a bit
hopefully,
differently.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's amazing
So,
actually where really big things come from somehow. When you
mm,
track it back, it's like, oh, so we sat next to each other at that conference, did we? And since then,
yeah.
it's just, and again, I think that just goes back to not underestimating the ability of individuals in this profession to make really serious, life-saving changes in their workplaces and in their communities.
Yeah. No, definitely. Yeah, definitely. So, just returning back to that the idea of whole life safety. Then, when we start to wrap up the discussion, what would be one, two, or three sort of practical things that somebody could go away after having listened to this and actually start doing to begin embracing that concept?
I think probably the easiest thing to do in a way is to start thinking about some of the workplace safety skills that also have meaningful reverberations in people's lives outside of work. So, first aid training, manual handling training, driver training, all of those are what I term kind of life skills. So, yes, you can do it with your employer hat on, with your kind of clear ROI as to why you're, doing this piece of work. But all of that, I think, have much wider benefits for the individual, but as I think you also get that kind of payback from investing in them as people as well. So that to me would seem like quite a sort of sensible starting point. Beyond that, I think it's kind of picking certain initiatives. So what about seasonal things like, fireworks is a perennial issue around, bonfire night. We've got, good resources that we can help work with organisations on to do their own kind of internal campaigns on things that statistically cause harm on a seasonal basis, or like you say, certain issues. If you know that falls prevention is a big part of your KPIs for this year, and you feel that you've kind of done the traditional routes and maybe now you're looking for a slightly different campaign, again, we can really help organisations with things like that. So I think it always starts with thinking what you're actually trying to achieve, what is your remit as an organisation, what's your business objectives, and then how do we usefully augment that? It doesn't work otherwise. The last thing I want anything RoSPA does is to be something else we have to turn our head to. It's how do we start with that, and how do we really look at it a bit creatively, look at it a bit differently, and perhaps kickstart something slightly unusual there. For a lot of people, to join RoSPA as a member is probably a sensible first step. It's a It's not a big investment, it's a few £100s. And by becoming a RoSPA member, you become part of a community. And being part of a community means you're at the forefront of finding out what's going on, being a part of things. And sometimes that's things like feeding into white papers, feeding into government consultations. It's that kind of whole having a voice thing. So sometimes it's you being a part of the national and international safety conversation. And sometimes it's you being a recipient of things. So it could be a recipient of a toolkit from RoSPA about, I don't know, driving in ice. It's ludicrous on a sunny day like today, but it could be that sort of thing. Or it could be being a recipient of best practice from a RoSPA award winner who's got a case study on X, Y, or Z. But it's about you as an individual representing your organisation and being at the forefront of developments. And you can engage as much or as little as you want, frankly, as a member. You know, like anything, it's a sliding scale, but that is a really low cost, simple way to start. Perhaps, you know, moving your own dial a bit and being a part of something that hopefully reaffirms to you why the role you do is so important and the value that you add is frankly immeasurable and ongoing.
Yeah, no, I love that. And lots and lots of things for people to go away and do there. So that's great. Right, last question. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Oh, wow.
Somebody's listened to this, they're really on board, they're taking away those ideas, they've got 60 seconds in an elevator to pitch to their CEO why they should take whole life safety and run with that as an idea. How would you go about doing that 60-second pitch?
I think I'd say that for most organisations, your people are your biggest asset. They are hard to recruit. They are hard to retain. You know, we want to hang on to them. 80% of accidents to working age people happen in their lives outside of work. So if you really want to keep people and actually keep them motivated and engaged and on board with the direction you're trying to drive your organisation, I think it's a really sensible part of a bigger puzzle. Was that 60 seconds? Perfect. I've no idea.
Get on to Dragon's Den. That was great, Becky. Really, really enjoyed that. Lastly, then, where can people learn more? What's the best way of getting in touch with you, etc., etc.? Plug away.
Yep, so the website is www.rospa.com. It's ROSPA. It's quite a big website, quite complicated. I'm available on LinkedIn as well. So I'm Rebecca Hickman is my actual name. So Rebecca Hickman, the CEO of RoSPA. So yeah, via LinkedIn, via the website, whatever suits you best, basically. Obviously, we've got Twitter, we've got Facebook, we've got, you know, the full range. So yeah, we're out there. But yes, get in touch, definitely.
Good stuff. Well, look, thank you very much for that. Really enjoyed it. And I think, you know, there's a lot there for people to go away by, hopefully be inspired by and start to make some changes. So yeah, really appreciate it.
No, Christian, thank you so much. And as I say, I hope it's kind of recognised that this is, whilst fully acknowledging the full place that the OSH professionals have already, you know, this is yeah, just another angle, like I say, as part of the conversation. But yeah, really good to talk to you. Thank you.
Good stuff. Cheers.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.